So we are back to the Through the Keyhole podcast. I'm very excited about my guest this morning. You might know her as Tea with Tolkien. That's how I know her primarily, but her name is actually Kaitlyn, and she hosts a podcast called Tea with Tolkien. She runs a very popular Twitter account by the same name. She loves Tolkien. I love Tolkien. That's why I wanted to talk to her. So, Kaitlyn, thank you for being here this morning.
Thanks for having me. It's a wonderful day to do a podcast.
It's always a wonderful day to do a podcast, especially about Tolkien.
Yes.
Um, so I want to just get right into it, and I thought that we could start where it makes the most sense to start. How did you get into Tolkien? Where did that begin for you?
Okay, so when the Fellowship of the Ring movie came out, I think I was around 10 years old or so. And I had never read any fantasy or really gotten into any reading much at all. But my dad was given a copy of the Fellowship of the Ring DVD. And my dad is much more of a Star Wars guy. He's not into fantasy. He's a
Mhm.
sci-fi kind of person. And so I think he got it for a birthday present. And he was like, I'm not really interested in it. And so he kind of just like left it out like on the table or something. And
Mhm.
I saw it and I was like, what is this? And so I immediately watched it and then was like obsessed with it. And so then I was the nerdy middle schooler who was writing my name in Elvish all over the place and
Yeah.
um, got made fun of quite a lot for that.
Sure.
But then it kind of followed me through high school and um, like whenever we would have to do any kind of a project, like an art class, if you'd have to do calligraphy, I was like, oh, I'll do a Tolkien quote, or an English class. If we had to analyze something, I was like, I'll analyze Tolkien.
Yeah.
And I really felt like he was something that kind of followed me through as I was growing up,
Mm.
just like a common thread through my life. So that's kind of how I got started. And then Tolkien has just become more and more important to me as I've grown up, I guess.
Yeah. And that's what's interesting to me about it is that you have managed to really make so much of your life about Tolkien. I know that there are probably other aspects of your life than just Tolkien, but just the fact that you've been able to get so much mileage out of this person and these stories that you genuinely love, I think is really interesting, is really remarkable, really. So what is it about Tolkien? Like, what kept you coming back time after time?
I think for me, the initial draw was the beauty of it and the way that the story comes together and how you can see yourself in it in so many ways. And I think as I've grown to appreciate it more, understanding the way that like the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion and everything Tolkien has published, really, it just makes so much sense to me.
Hmm.
And with a lot of other stories, you can find like a plot hole or you can find things that don't feel consistent. But with Tolkien, I feel like he had such a strong understanding of what he was writing. And to him, it was like he was telling a history of a world that really did exist,
Mm-hmm.
And so for him, everything makes sense. And I think a lot of that kind of comes from the way that he was raised so heavily steeped in Catholicism.
Yeah.
And then for me, as like a newcomer to Catholicism, I feel like that has really helped me a lot. Putting the whole world in perspective. Like one of Tolkien's major themes is like the entire history of the world is one big story, and you are playing a very important part in like a very small part of history, but yet what you're doing is really important, and we're all connected
Yeah. Yeah.
through this same tale. And so I think that has kind of been what's really stuck with me a lot.
Yeah. And it's what is it? It's in the Two Towers where they're on their way to Cirith Ungol, and Sam points out that all the stories that Bilbo had told him about Arendelle and all the Silmarils and all that, Sam had the epiphany that they're in that same story and they're
Mm-hmm.
playing their own I don't remember if he referred to it as a small part. Certainly it wasn't, but that they're still in that. And yeah, that seems to be very much the way Tolkien explained or presented it, because even you say that that he presents it almost as if he's telling a history of the world. And I believe maybe in his letters, I believe that's where, I mean, I'm sure he said it many places, but he points out that he's writing this not, he doesn't feel as if he's writing this from his imagination, but more as if he's being given this information. And he writes it from the perspective of it like being something that happened before the history that we have of what we know about human history. And so yeah, there's this different element, I guess, to Tolkien that you might not get from Star Wars or Harry Potter, or God forbid, Game of Thrones, of this is not a story, this is actually a lived in experience that we're still continuing in some way.
Right. And I feel like there have been a lot of times where I've been reading something written by Tolkien, and the way that it makes sense in the context of the story has helped me to understand something like in our own primary world. Like Tolkien refers to his created world as like the secondary world.
Mm-hmm.
And so our primary world has made a lot more sense to me after like reading the way that Tolkien presents things in his own secondary sub-created world. So stuff like that is super cool to me, and it's really unique. I haven't seen a lot of it in other stories.
Yeah, yeah, it's. I mean, I guess that's probably why all fantasy after Tolkien has has gone so hard to try to mimic him, or again, in the example of Game of Thrones, has tried to take his beautiful image and kind of turn it on its head. Um, what do you think? Do you think that maybe his deep interest in like Norse mythology and European mythology in general, um, what role do you think that plays? Because like those myths were stories that those cultures told as a means of not necessarily telling everybody how things are, but trying to kind of make sense of what they believed, where they lived, what they valued. And you get that sense from Tolkien as well. And he said that he wanted the Lord of the Rings to be a mythology for England. So what do you make of that? What do you think of that?
Right. And as soon as you started asking that question, that's what I was going to mention. The whole idea that he wanted to create a myth that was specifically for England, because he didn't feel like they had really anything that was good enough for him.
Yeah.
And I know that he was very inspired by all of the Norse mythology and stuff like that. And that's not something that I've studied as much as I've studied like the influence that his Catholicism had on him, just because it honestly means more to me. And so I've definitely been really interested in learning more about all of the other influences that he's had, like his different mythologies that he's loved. But I know he was very inspired by them, and they meant a lot to him for sure.
Yeah. Have what off the top of your head, what biographies of Tolkien have you read?
I have just read, I forget what it's titled exactly, but it's just the Humphrey Carpenter one.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if you've seen the newer book by Holly Ordway, Tolkien, A Modern Reading. I think that's what it's called.
I've heard of it. I haven't read it yet.
It's not as much a biography, but it's more about what influenced him. And I've listened to her give a couple interviews on it, and she was mentioning that she didn't feel like the officially authorized biography of Tolkien really did him justice, especially in the ways that I talked about his influences, because apparently Humphrey Carpenter kind of wrote off the idea that Tolkien would be influenced by anything modern. And he kind of presented the idea that he like rejected anything that was written around that same time. But in Holly Ordway's book, she was kind of saying that he was actually inspired by a lot of modern stuff like that. So I thought that was really interesting, but I haven't had a ton of time to read a lot of biographies of him because I'm so busy reading The Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion kind of over and over for our book club.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. How many times if you had to guess, because I'm sure it's many, how many times have you read the entire Legendarium?
Are you counting like the history of Middle Earth in that? Or
Oh gosh, no, that's extra
okay.
credit.
Okay. I've probably only read The Hobbit like 2 times because out of all of it, that's kind of my least favorite. I've probably read the Silmarillion 4 or 5 times.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Lord of the Rings, probably 5 or 6. So when I was writing my devotional to Middle Earth and Back Again,
Mm-hmm.
what I was doing is I was reading it while I was listening to the audiobook. So I've listened to each chapter.
Okay.
Like as I'm writing on each chapter, I would kind of just listen to the chapter over and over. So I feel like each individual chapter I've probably listened to like 10 times maybe.
Sure.
But as a whole, like just as a straight read through, probably like 5-ish.
Okay. I mean,
Yeah.
that's respectable.
Thanks.
Yeah, this isn't about me, it's about you, but I kind of feel you on The Hobbit because my parents gave me The Hobbit right around the time that the first movie came out, the first Lord of the Rings movie, not the Hobbit movie. And I don't count the Hobbit movies. Maybe we can talk about that in a little bit. But so they gave me that, and I was in high school at the time, and I started reading it, and I don't think I was able to get to the trolls before I was like, God, what is the big deal about the Hobbit? I just don't get it. And so I put it away. And then the first movie came out. I saw Fellowship of the Ring, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. And so I read all three. I read Fellowship, Two Towers, and Return of the King, just back to back to back. I think I did it in like 2 months maybe when I was in high school. And then I went back and I watched The Hobbit, or read The Hobbit, and it was like a light switch, you know. It was just like, okay, so this is how it's going to be from now on. I get it now.
Well, I feel like The Hobbit has such a different tone from The Lord of the Rings. It's a lot more lighthearted.
Yeah.
And one thing that was hard for me to get past was that it's like one adventure, one kind of like silly adventure after another. And it's like, oh, we've got the goblins, and then like we've got the spiders. And so I definitely, obviously I respect it. No disrespect to The Hobbit.
Sure.
But it's just not like my favorite thing. I really, really love the Silmarillion, which is just so different from the Hobbit. And so if someone's trying to get into Tolkien for the first time and they're not really used to his writing style, definitely The Hobbit is a great introduction because it's a lot easier to breeze through.
Yeah.
But it's not my favorite.
Sure. I totally get it. It's like it's a quaint book.
Yeah.
It's quaint, it's charming. It's not going to challenge you in the ways that Lord of the Rings or even the Silmarillion are going to challenge you, but it's nice, it's comfortable. Like it, The Hobbit is the most Hobbitish book I can think of.
True. Yeah, that's true.
That,
for sure.
I think that's how I would describe it, is that you read The Hobbit and you have some experience of what it's like to be a Hobbit. Because like for whatever you want to say about The Hobbit, that first chapter, just describing the life of hobbits and hobbit holes and the comforts of home, it's just like you read that on a bad day and things start to get better, kind of thing.
For sure.
Why what do you love about the Silmarillion? And I know that might be a big question, but what is it like? If you had to boil it down to just a few points, what would you say it is?
Well, I think kind of going back to what I was saying before about how one of the main things you can, not main, but a big thing that I've learned from Tolkien is that everything is connected. And so after having read The Lord of the Rings a couple of times when I was in high school, I finally picked up the Silmarillion. One of my best friends from high school actually gave me a copy of the Silmarillion as a wedding gift. I got married like younger, so he gave it to me and he wrote this really nice inscription in the inside. And I still have that copy. And that was really like how I first got into the Silmarillion. But But yeah, just the way that as you're reading The Lord of the Rings, there's a lot in it that doesn't make sense. There's just a lot of mentions to the Silmarillion. And if you haven't read the Silmarillion and you don't even know what it is, you kind of just scratch your head and then you move on and the story goes on. But you are able to have such a deeper grasp of The Lord of the Rings after you've read the Silmarillion. And I also just, the stories are just so intense and beautiful, and many of them are so dark and depressing, and yet it's still just like such a beautiful story, and it means so much. And you can also see a lot of the influence that all of the mythologies have had on Tolkien when you're reading the Silmarillion. So I don't know, it's just amazing. You can tell it's his best work, I think.
I agree. Yeah, like I think you said it really well. It's a beautiful piece of literature. And from a guy like Tolkien to describe something that he writes as particularly beautiful is really saying something, because Tolkien, one of the criticisms, I can't believe people criticize him for this, but one of the criticisms of Tolkien is that he'll spend too much time describing a landscape or describing the way that Gondor, the Gondorian towers look, or Rohan and the rocky plains and all that. It's like, how can people not just eat that up with a spoon? But
right. And it's so immersive too.
Yeah.
When he does that, you're really able to feel like you're there, which I think is a huge part of why his stories are so good. Because a lot of the times, if you're reading a story and then you can't really get into it and you don't really buy into it, it just doesn't feel real to you. It doesn't matter as much in the end.
Yeah. I read an interesting theory, and granted, I'm about to mention Harry Potter, but we'll get back to Tolkien, I promise. Okay. I read an interesting theory a couple of years ago about one thing that makes Harry Potter so gripping, and because like you hear about all these people who like they go through all 7 books back to back, like I did with Lord of the Rings. And granted, they're easier to read than Lord of the Rings, so that's part of it. But there's also something that is, I must admit, very engaging about Harry Potter. So the theory I read was that one thing that makes Harry Potter feel like such an engaging, immersive book and world, I guess, is the emphasis that Rowling put on making it clear what season it was in the book. So like it wasn't just they were playing Quidditch and then it was time for finals. It was like it's autumn and school is starting, and now it's winter, and now we're doing Christmas things, and now the flowers are coming out because it's spring. Like just making it very clear. And so it delivered a better sense of the passage of time, which just adds a layer of immersion to the book. And when I read that, I realized like that's actually entirely true. I had never realized it, but you experience the seasons passing as you read as you read Harry Potter. And so like, yeah, with Lord of the Rings, I'm thinking specifically about the Silmarillion, and more specifically about the chapter that just describes Beleriand.
That chapter.
Yeah, which I must admit, my most recent read through, I did skip that chapter.
That chapter is and it's right in the middle of the book, and you're just picking up speed, and then it just like knocks you over, and you're so bored.
Yeah.
I honestly, if people are new to the Silmarillion, I would just skim it. Mm-hmm. You don't need to know that much about the map.
Yeah.
But like, yeah, sorry.
No. It's like that chapter and the chapter on the Valar and the Maiar. Like those two, I think, are probably the ones that throw the people off the most, because it's like the chapter on the Valar and the Maiar is like reading Dickens. There are just so many names and so many things that everyone is responsible for. And it's like, yes, but you really only need to remember just like 3 or 4 of these names. The rest of them, they're in and out of the story, and you're never going to hear from them again. What would you say is your favorite chapter of the Silmarillion, or your favorite tale?
Ooh. Well, I think the obvious answer is of Beren and Luthien because of
Yeah.
how much it meant to Tolkien himself.
Hmm.
So I feel like it would almost be a little bit rude of me not to choose that as my favorite.
Fair.
And there's also just so many parts in it that are so funny to me. I mean, that chapter has everything. It has werewolves, it has vampire Sauron, and it has like Luthien like dancing for, I forget, it's Melkor
Mhm.
Morgoth. And like everything. And then I don't remember if it's in that chapter or the next chapter, the part where Thingol is like, oh yeah, you got the Silmaril, and he's like, yeah, it's in my hand right now, and then he raises up his hand and his hand is gone. Like
Yeah.
that to me is so funny, and it's like this combination of Tolkien's like epic storytelling. There's like romance and adventure, but then there's also like this incredible humor
Yeah.
that is so unexpected. And so I really feel like of Beren and Luthien is probably like the all-time best chapter. It almost feels like all of the Silmarillion before that is prologue, and you're just building. And then after you get to that chapter, it's just like all falling action kind of is how
Yeah.
it feels to me. Like that's really like the height of the story,
Yeah.
and everything hinges on that story. So I think that's probably the best one.
I mean, you make a good case for it. I was going to say the Ainu Lindale.
Well, yeah, okay. That's valid.
Only because it is such a beautiful chapter. It is
Mm-hmm.
so like it's how can you not be moved when you read Tolkien's creation story? Just the way that creation was sung into being and you know you talk about the humor of Beren and Luthien. I've always found the way that Tolkien, both Tolkien's, I guess, J.R.R. and Christopher, but the way that they describe Melkor's attempt to throw off the music as just like trumpets and clanging cymbals.
Mm-hmm.
I just picture like a kid in a recording studio just banging on his dad's drum set and calling it, you know, Bach. Um, but yeah, Baron and Luthien is definitely the high point, I think, because yeah, like after that, Baron and Luthien kind of, in my opinion, it kind of kicks off Lord of the Rings in a
Yes,
sense
yeah.
because
Because
it's
there's
like,
the common thread. Yeah.
yeah, go ahead, common thread.
Oh yeah, I mean just the way that in the Fellowship of the Ring, Strider is like singing to himself the story of Beren and Luthien, and then I forget who because I haven't read it in a while, but it's one of the hobbits is kind of like, oh, tell me about this story,
Hmm.
and then Aragorn kind of alludes to it vaguely, but it's like that's what it is, and then with him and Arwen, they're kind of like a mirror of Beren and Luthien,
Yeah,
and so just the way that they all come together through that story is very a cool connection.
yeah, and the way that I believe I'm remembering this right in the history of Middle Earth, Legendarium, whatever you want to call it, there are only what is it, three instances of men wedding elves, I believe. It's Beren and Luthien, um, Tuor and Idril, I believe,
That sounds right.
and then Aragorn and Arwen. And like Beren and Luthien are the first, so like they kind of
Mm-hmm.
kick off. They kick off basically like the redemption story of Middle Earth before it's even completely totally fallen.
Mm-hmm. That's a good, yeah, for sure.
Gosh, I just finished the Silmarillion last week, and I already want to go back and read it
Oh,
again.
okay.
Thanks
Yeah,
a
we
lot.
did. Our book club was January through May.
Yeah.
So finished at the end of May. And I've been trying to get in the zone for the Lord of the Rings book club, which starts in like 2 days. And I feel like my brain is still in Silmarillion mode. So it's been really hard to switch to just get back into like hobbits and walking. It's just walking, 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 walking.
Sure.
But yes, it's amazing. I love the Silmarillion.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a book that I like. I rarely feel nostalgic about books, but it's a book that when I'm not reading it, like I know exactly where it is on my bookshelf, and I always look at it and like maybe just read one chapter, like just scratch that itch that you're feeling. Um,
Yeah.
Yeah. What about, so talked about the Silmarillion. What about the Lord of the Rings itself, the trilogy? What would you say your favorite chapter, your favorite characters, your favorite aspects or themes? Like, what is it specifically about the trilogy that just moves you?
Definitely I'd say my favorite character is Sam.
Hmm.
I think there's so much to him, and you really underestimate him in the beginning.
Yeah.
And as I was rereading The Lord of the Rings right now, I'm in the first couple chapters, and the way that he's really just treated like he's kind of just like the help is how he is to Frodo at the beginning of the books. But as they go on, you really see his character developing right before your eyes, and you get to learn so much about him. And I think my favorite chapter is I forget if it's, I always mix up the end of the Two Towers and the beginning of the Return of the King. I think a lot of that is to do with the movies because they kind of
Yeah.
morphed them together. But there's the part where Frodo has been taken by the orcs and Sam is like trying to find him. And
Mm.
he is going up this tower as high as he goes, and he gets to the top and he can't get in. He can't like find Frodo. He's just at this dead end. And he sits down and he sings this little song to himself, just where he says like, I will not say the day is done nor bid the stars farewell. And that poem has meant so much to me. A lot of the times I'll have, I think right now even I have it as my lock screen on my phone. But just
Lovely.
that the way that he's like, he recognizes that there's still goodness and beauty and light and joy in the world, even if he can't see it right now.
Yeah.
Even if it's unattainable for him, like it's still there.
Yeah.
And just to have the courage to keep putting one foot in front of another, knowing that you might be having like the darkest day of your life, but that there's still goodness and it's all worth like continuing on.
Yeah.
And then by singing his song, that's how I think the orcs hear him, and that's how he figures out where Frodo is.
Yeah.
So it's like all kind of his last moment of hope ends up helping him figure everything out, kind of.
Yeah.
And just like saying, I won't give up, no matter how dark it is. Kind of that's another big thing that I've learned from Tolkien is just being able to recognize that no matter how bad things feel for you, like there's still goodness, even if you don't see it at the
Yeah.
moment.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way of describing Sam and kind of the the overlooked value I think that Sam brings to the story. Because yeah, like he does start out as the help, and obviously he has his big moments in the end. But yeah, it seems like as you say that, I'm realizing that maybe the biggest things that Sam did were, you know, seemingly the lowest points and
Mm-hmm.
the maybe the most inconsequential things of just like keeping Frodo going, keeping that fire of hope kindled when you know they're in the dark land, and there's the sun is even getting through the clouds and you can't see the stars at night, and the very air is a poisonous fume. And then there's always Sam just saying like, well, let's just get down this hill, let's
Mm-hmm.
just get across this plain, let's just, you know, I can't carry it for you but I can carry you, kind of thing.
Right. I feel like Sam's role is really of that supportive role,
Yeah.
where he knows he's not the main character and he knows he's not meant to be the hero, but he understands like his role is to he's gonna get Frodo there
Yeah.
no matter what it takes. And I feel like in my own life, I don't really feel like I'm like the hero. I'm not really like the main character. I'm not like the breadwinner for my family.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like the supporter
Yeah.
of my family, myself a lot in the way that Sam, he just sees his role as to help others and just to carry them if he needs to.
Yeah.
So that's, I just love Sam. I think he's
I
great.
I love Sam too, and it's as we're talking, there's a puppy whose middle name is Samwise curled up on my foot.
Aww.
Um, So yeah, that I wouldn't say that Sam is my favorite character, but only because I don't have a favorite character. But he's definitely like him, Aragorn, and Faramir are probably
Mhm.
tied for my top three.
Oh
Um,
yeah, they're definitely the best three, I think, for
yeah,
sure.
which again is really saying something because like every member of the Fellowship, even Boromir, I think Boromir gets a bad
Mhm.
rap, but even like he did it right in the very end. It took him a while to
Yeah.
get there, but he redeemed himself.
And you have to think about the environment Boromir was raised in too. So
Yeah.
he didn't come from the Shire, so he couldn't make the same choices that Frodo made. And same with Aragorn. Like Aragorn has kind of been training for this moment for his whole life,
Yeah.
whereas Boromir is super confused. He's had his father kind of influencing his whole life, and he's not really as equipped to handle the temptation of the ring as, say, like Frodo or Sam or any of the other members of the Fellowship. So like I feel like Boromir could be any of us.
Yeah.
Um, I he had one bad day, and like
Yeah.
so like definitely he had more of like a inclination towards the desire for power,
Sure.
but I really feel like a lot of it was due to the way that he was brought up and everything he had been told, I guess. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. No, I mean he was brought up by the Steward of Gondor,
Mm-hmm.
whose sole focus was protecting Gondor and by extension the West from the
Mm-hmm.
encroaching shadow of Mordor. So he was brought up in, we'll just call it, not the most nurturing environment, I would
Right.
imagine.
He was
Waking
like raised in shadow is kind
Yeah.
of what it felt to me. And um it didn't help at all that his father Denethor was like obsessed with the Palantir. And so he had just this
Yeah.
constant negative influence. Um and then he had obviously fought in so many battles that you could see how he would be hardened and kind of jaded against a lot of hope. And then you have like Frodo on the other hand, who's just like the complete opposite, who had just been raised in, the most perfect nurturing environment. So
Yeah.
you can see how Frodo is able to handle the ring a lot better than Boromir.
Yeah. Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in Minas Tirith before the ring was destroyed, and just to wake up every day and see like the smoke and the shadow of Mordor? Have you ever wondered what
It
effect
would
that
be
would have on you?
horrifying. Yeah. I feel like you would live in, like, it would be very hard to hope or to have any optimism just because you're so close to that and you
Yeah.
see it every day, And I feel like a part of that's kind of what I keep in mind, like when I'm raising my kids. Like, I want our home to be like their Shire. And you need,
Mm,
like, I want them to be like so steeped in goodness and beauty and truth and love so that they are able to like handle the horrors of the world when they leave it because they're so like grounded,
yeah.
if that makes sense.
No,
So I think about that a lot.
that makes perfect sense. I would recommend a book to you. It's called The Theology of Home. It's
Oh, I have that.
You have it?
There's a second one out now too. Did you know
There's
that?
there's a second one out, and I interviewed one of the authors a couple of weeks ago, and they're in the process of editing the third one as well.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. So that's coming out sometime next year.
Nice.
But the way you described, kind of trying to make your home Shire-esque, is very Theology of Home to me, because
Mm-hmm.
like it's, in that book it talks about how to use every aspect of your home, whether it's like your front yard, your entryway, hosting like get-togethers and things, using all of those different aspects as a means of promoting the good, the beautiful, the true, promoting like what's left to fight for in this world, kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, I think that if more people valued food and good cheer over hordes of gold, I think that that's very much in keeping with that. I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
very good goal to have.
Yeah, I think so.
So if you had a favorite chapter in the trilogy, like just a single favorite chapter, what would it be and why?
It's the chapter after Frodo and Sam, after the quest has been completed and they're awakening. I think it's called The Fields of Cormallen.
Yeah.
I think that's what the chapter is called.
Yeah.
Where there's that moment where Frodo and Sam are like waking up and realizing that they did it, you know, like it's done, the ring is gone, and they can just be like at peace. And Sam, when he sees Gandalf, he's like, Gandalf, I thought you were dead. I thought I was dead. And then he just starts crying and he's like, is everything sad going to come untrue? Like that line is just like piercing.
Yeah.
And so he's just like, that whole chapter, Sam is just like blubbering, crying. And then they're like giving them new clothes and everyone's getting dressed up and they're like celebrating. And I just imagine, and like spring has come. So winter has passed and like it's spring and it's just like the most glorious chapter. I feel like it's almost like a heavenly chapter in a way, like you've finished your quest and like there's peace and joy and I don't know.
Yeah, like you've done what you needed to do, you know, welcome home my good and faithful servant kind of
right
thing.
It totally has that kind of a feel for sure.
Yeah. And so maybe that's a good segue because and I don't want to butcher the wording, so I'm going to ask you to describe how would you describe your podcast, Tea with Tolkien, because it's unique in its focus. And so how would you describe it?
So I think the way that I say it is Tea with Tolkien is a community inspired by the works and faith of J.R.R. Tolkien. And our podcast is kind of just like an extension of that.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm mostly using the podcast as an element of our book club. And so I'll do like book club episodes.
Sure.
But when I have more time, in the past, I mean, I maybe did like 15 or so episodes before the book club started that were very like, topical. So I'd be like, today we're going to talk about Gollum. But we approach everything from the perspective of being inspired by Tolkien's own faith. So I think what makes our podcast interesting and why I feel really confident in doing it is I'm not like looking at Harry Potter through a Catholic perspective, because that doesn't make sense because the author isn't Catholic, you know, or like if you were to look at Game of Thrones from a Catholic perspective, I just like, I don't know why you would do that, but because Tolkien was so Catholic, he wasn't just like, oh, I go to mass sometimes. He was like ultra Catholic, extremely devoted, like it affected everything. It meant so much to him. And so I think from looking at, we just look at his works through that very same perspective that he wrote them in, and use it to kind of enrich our own faith lives. Kind of, I like to say we're growing in hobbitness and holiness. That's kind of like my goal here.
That's such a good line, growing in hobbitness and holiness. I love that. I love that wordplay. So then what would you say that the Lord of the Rings, Tolkien's life, maybe the Legendarium, however you want to look at it, what would you say him and his work have done for your faith? Because you said earlier that you weren't always Catholic. You became Catholic, and it sounded like becoming Catholic and your love of Tolkien, it sounds like they overlapped.
Oh yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say he was like the main reason. Sure. But so my husband and I started, what happened was we had a really long commute every day because we each had separate jobs that were on opposite sides of town, but we only had one car. So he would drive me to work and then he'd drive himself to work. So we just had a really long car ride. So we would listen to Catholic Answers in the car all the time. And I think it must have been somehow through listening to that I realized Tolkien was Catholic. And after that, before that, I hadn't known a single Catholic in my life. Like, I think my neighbor growing up was, but it's not like she had ever talked to me about it. And I had this really strong perception of Catholics that, you know, that they worshiped Mary and that they worshiped the Pope and their Bible wasn't a real Bible and a lot of stuff like that. And so after I learned that Tolkien was Catholic, it really made me step back because I respected him so much. And he seemed to me like someone who understood the way that the world worked.
Mm-hmm.
And because everything that he wrote fit together so well, and his perspective made so much sense, that it really caused me to take a second look and be like, wait a second, like if this guy who I really respect is Catholic, like maybe this is worth looking into.
Yeah.
And so he was kind of like the first Catholic that I met, even though I never really met him.
Sure.
So I think he really like opened the door for me, I guess, because I had read a lot of C.S. Lewis,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like helped strengthen my general belief in Christianity.
Definitely.
But then Tolkien was kind of like the next step that led me farther down towards what I feel like is the complete truth of Christianity, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, that's yeah, he's, you know, you see people asking questions occasionally like what are, if you had to recommend 3 books for someone to understand the Catholic faith, what would they be? And it's always like the Summa Theologica, City of God, and Lord of the Rings.
Right.
It's like you know, like people, it's such a great undercover, I guess I'll just call it an evangelical tool, because there is, like, I know that Tolkien was not a fan of allegory. He made that very clear that he was not an allegorical fan. But you read through the Lord of the Rings and it's like, oh, Limbus sounds interesting, and then you realize, oh, that's supposed to be the Eucharist.
Well, yeah, after I converted, I was reading it again and I was like, wait a second, way bread from heaven almost. It's like, oh, this bread strengthens you on the journey, like crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's one of the most obvious parallels now that I have that Catholic perspective. I was like, crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, and like how the ring was destroyed on March 25th.
Yes.
And how that is historically the date of the crucifixion, and the party left Rivendell on December 25th, which is obviously historically the birth of Christ. So it's just like there are all these things, but then you get into it deeper, and you see like the pattern of, what is it? Priest, prophet, or no, it's what is it? Priest, king,
and priest, prophet, and king.
Yeah, priest, prophet, and king. And so like you see like Frodo is one of them, Faramir is another, Gandalf is a third, but then you see Aragorn is all 3, and and just like all these different aspects. I remember I was reading, I think it was Brad Birzer's book, The Sanctifying Myth of J.R.R. Tolkien, which is excellent, really good, excellent book. I'm actually interviewing him this afternoon. I'm super excited about that.
That's great.
But I remember that was the first time I encountered that concept, and just the way he laid it out, and it was just like, duh, like how did I miss that before? Yeah, it's, I just, when I think about Lord of the Rings, I eventually just become silent, because there's just so much to say, and there's so much one can take from it. So if you had to encourage someone who is maybe not familiar with Tolkien, or maybe someone who's familiar with Tolkien but maybe is not familiar with Catholicism, and you want them to maybe just start seeing those parallels or be aware of them, what would you say to that person? Like, how would you sell that idea?
Well, I did write a book on it.
Good.
So not to like plug my stuff, but
no,
I wrote a Lord of the Rings kind of like a companion journal / devotional that kind of does introduce these elements to you. And I think a gentle way. There's basic journaling or taking notes. And then I've got a little reflection for each chapter that usually draws out something that was in the story.
Yeah.
So that would definitely be something, but there are a lot of other books. I know Joseph Pearce wrote two books. One is called Frodo's Journey, and one is called Bilbo's Journey. And those are really good for like brand new people to Tolkien. They're pretty easy to read. And then there's also The Philosophy of Tolkien by Peter Kreeft, which I think is probably the best book that I've read about Tolkien, because it also almost reads like an introduction to philosophy. And I didn't take any philosophy in college. So when I was reading it, I was like, oh, this is great, because I felt like I learned a lot about philosophy and Tolkien, which was really neat. But then also Tolkien's Sanctifying Myth. Yeah. That one's super good. So there are a lot of different books that people could pick up if they are interested in it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Have you, I can never remember the author. And I hate that, but it was a really good book. It's called The Battle of Middle-earth.
Looking at my book stack. Oh, I actually have that right. Rutledge.
Yes, Rutledge.
I have it right here.
Yeah,
That's funny.
that is another. It's maybe not an introduction, but for people who get through the Pearces and the Birzers and want to go deeper, I think that's a very good one. It's unfortunately it's not written from the perspective of a Catholic. I think that Rutledge is maybe Anglican, but it's still very good for people who are interested in the overlap of Lord of the Rings and the Christian faith.
Right. And there are a lot of, I mean, it definitely makes more sense when you look at it from a Catholic perspective, because it's going to be, pretty much the same as him. But I also really do enjoy reading books on Tolkien by different Protestants.
Yeah.
There's another one called The Messiah Comes to Middle-earth. I think it's by Philip Ryken. And he comes at it from a more Protestant perspective, but I still thought it was really interesting. And he looks at it with that same priest, prophet, and king sort of format, I guess, is how he does it. And I thought that was a really good book too.
Yeah. So, being conscious of time, we're coming up near the end. So I wanted to get your opinion on just a few of the other aspects of Tolkien for people who may not be into the books so much. What is your opinion of the Hobbit movies?
Oh boy. Well, I do think that a lot about the Hobbit movies are really good. The costuming, the setting, everything like that, everything visual, I thought was really good. And then I feel like there are a lot of individual scenes that are extremely well done. Like the first half of the first movie was incredible, and the way that they did Riddles in the Dark was really good. But I did not enjoy the way that they split it into 3 movies. I feel like they really could have done one movie. It could have been a 3-hour movie that would have been fine, and it could have been great. But I did not like how they added in a lot of darker elements. Like the Hobbit is written as a children's movie, and they tried to say, what if we made it a kind of scary, intense action movie for adults instead? And so there was a lot of that I wasn't expecting. And so I don't know, when you go to a movie called The Hobbit, you kind of think it would be more like The Hobbit.
Yeah.
And then I didn't like the insertion of Toriel. I just wasn't into that. And this like little love triangle that was going on, I didn't appreciate that. But in general, I think they did a pretty good job. From what I've read, they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants when they were making the movie. So I guess I can't fault them too much, but I don't really watch them. Like if I'm going to be like, oh, I want to watch The Lord of the Rings, I'll watch The Lord of the Rings. I'm not really interested in experiencing the Hobbit movies again.
Yeah.
I saw the first one at the midnight premiere and I was so excited. And then the other 2, I don't even think I saw them in theaters. I was like, I'll watch them when they come out at home. Like I just completely lost all interest in it. I don't know. They didn't do a horrible job. It could have been a lot worse, but they're just not them.
Yeah.
I don't know.
So last year during the lockdown. It's hard for me to say last year because it doesn't feel like it's any different now. But
Mm-hmm.
when we were locked down about a year ago, I guess I'll say, my roommate and I, we got into the habit of just watching through all the various trilogies and sagas, cinematic stuff. And he had gotten his hands on the I guess the 4K or the extended editions of the Hobbit movies, and so when it
I
came
don't even
time,
think I've seen those.
don't
Okay.
don't
Oh
because
no.
one, it's not worth the money or the time for what is added in. Like there's one scene that is obvious why it got cut out. What's not obvious is why it got put back in. But it's a scene toward the beginning where Bilbo's just been visited by Gandalf, and he went down to the market, and they're having like a market day kind of thing, and he saw Gandalf's big pointy hat, and so he spent like 5 minutes just bobbing and weaving amongst the other hobbits trying to get away from Gandalf. It's like, why did you waste probably an afternoon filming this? But
Yeah.
the
Huh.
scene that I'm thinking of, it comes in the third movie, which I can't even remember the name of the third movie, but it comes in the third movie,
Isn't that the
and
Battle of Five Armies?
that's it, Battle of Five Armies. And there again is like a 5 minute a segment of three of the dwarves, and somehow they got their hands on a chariot, I think, and
Hmm.
they're just basically like gliding on a frozen river, cutting off the heads of orcs in the
Why?
most like just ludicrous ways. Um, and like I had to get up and just like refresh my beverage while that scene was on because it wasn't worth my time. It just wasn't. Um, what are your thoughts on uh, the Amazon Prime project?
Okay, so I am cautiously optimistic. Um, I the way I'm looking at it is that I don't see a point in getting angry until I have a reason to get angry.
That's fair.
Um, I've got a year until the movie or until the first episode even comes out. So why would I spend a year being like grumpy or irritated about a show that hasn't even been released yet?
Sure.
So it's hard for me when people are like, oh, I can't believe it. I can't, blah, 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 blah. It's going to be so bad. I'm like, really? You haven't seen anything about it. You haven't heard anything official.
Sure.
It's all rumor. But I was kind of feeling like meh on it. Either way, I'll watch it. But then when they released that photo, I was like so frazzled when I saw it. I was like, the trees, like, because
Yeah.
it has two trees in it that look like the two trees of Valinor.
Certainly
So then
do.
I'm thinking, like, my head was spinning. I remember when I saw the image on my phone, I was making my kids lunch
Mhm.
and I just had to like sit down and I was so frazzled. My parents were here and I was like, I can't talk right now. Like, I'm thinking about this.
Yeah.
What could this mean? So it has to be prologue,
Yeah.
but it was so beautiful. So after I saw that, I was like, okay, maybe I will be a little bit excited. I'm just going to be excited until I have no reason to be, like there's no point in just being like grumpy all the time. I'll just be happy. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I wish that I share that view, but maybe not to the degree that you do, just because
Right.
like I think you and I even talked about this on Twitter a little bit, like when they said that they had hired an intimacy coordinator or
Oh,
something,
yeah.
and then hearing about Tom Shippey leaving the project,
That's
and
true.
things like that is like I'm a recovering cynic, and so I hear things like that, and it's just like don't react, don't react, don't react, give them a chance. But
Hmm.
I'm
So, but with the intimacy coordinator, that could mean nothing,
right.
the that could just be because we know like in Numenor they had human sacrifice. So, I mean, it could be something as simple as that. It could be that someone is just, partially undressed because they're being sacrificed to Morgoth. Like it could be anything. I really, an intimacy coordinator is just hired to like be there as an advocate for the actors and actresses and just to like protect them and when they're in any kind of potentially uncomfortable situation. And so I think it's probably good that they hired one, because with things, how we all know how things can be on like TV show sets, apparently. And you don't want anyone who's not supposed to be there watching people while they're filming anything like intimate. So, I mean, it could be really bad or it could not be. And they only hired one. It's not like they had to hire 15 of them. So I don't know. That I listened to an episode of the Tolkien Road on that topic, and it made me feel a lot better, actually.
Okay.
So it could, it might not be bad. They spent so much money on it too, that it would make me think that they would want it to appeal to as many people as possible. Which would hopefully mean families, because I love that I can watch the Lord of the Rings movies with my kids. Like, they are still a little bit scared, but there's nothing lewd about them. And so I can feel comfortable with them watching it. And I think that if they make it so that parents can't watch it with their kids, they're going to lose out on a ton of money and support, I think.
Yeah. I think that is a good measured approach, which is nice to hear these days. So I want to end with a quick lightning round.
Okay.
I'm taking this concept from the Prancing Pony podcast because I love it and I think it's great. So, first question: Rohan or Gondor?
Gondor.
Gondor. Okay. Would you rather live in the first, the second, or the third age?
The third. That was hard.
I could hear the gears turning for that one.
That was hard. Like,
yeah,
maybe the beginning of the second.
Yeah, I mean, there's
what part of the second? Yeah.
Yeah, like, okay. Would you rather live in the Shire or Rivendell?
Rivendell.
Interesting, because you try to make your home like the Shire, but you're.
Well, I was also going to say during that, while we were talking about that, I have a quote that I just put up above our fireplace. That's that quote where Bilbo is describing Rivendell. Like, it was a perfect house, whether you liked food or sleep or, blah, blah, blah.
That's a good point.
And that's another thing that I want. And they also say evil things did not come into that valley. And that's another way that I feel about our house is I want it to be a perfect place for whatever you need. And then also like a safe haven.
Yeah. I like that. Merry or Pippin?
Merry.
Okay. And finally, Arwen or Éowyn?
Éowyn.
Oh, okay. That
one
came really quick.
For sure.
That one came really quick. Well, are there any final thoughts that you want to say about Tolkien or anything else?
You guys should read more Tolkien. He's great.
Simple, to the point. I like it. Well, Kaitlyn, I appreciate your time. Thanks for being on the show. I'd love to have you back anytime.
Thank you.
Where can people find you?
They can go to my website, teawithtolkien.com, or they can find me on Instagram or Twitter at teawithtolkien.
All right. Well, that'll be it. Thank you for your time, and
we'll
be talking again soon.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.